Hello everyone, I'm Doc Hamels and welcome to our new series called Chautauqua Strong and Healthy. Today we're featuring Carey Skelton, who will be providing Eat Healthy, Be Active community workshops.
Hello there, I'm Carey Skelton, one of the registered dietitians at the Office for Aging in Chautauqua County. I also am a nutrition educator for SNAP Ed New York. Today we are going to be starting a 4-part series called Eat Healthy, Be Active Community Workshops. The first of this series today is enjoying healthy food that actually tastes great. So we're going to talk about how to get your healthy foods to taste good so that you actually enjoy eating them. With that being said, I may be referring to a few handouts throughout this series. You can call Chautauqua County New York Connects at 716-753-4582 and get your copy of handouts sent to you so you can follow along as you watch the program. The 4-part series is based on the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans are revised and reviewed every 5 years. So the current Dietary Guidelines for Americans are entitled the Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2015-2020. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans provides advice for Americans that helps to promote weight maintenance and weight loss, prevent chronic disease, and provide adequate balanced nutrition. There are 5 main messages that the Dietary Guidelines for Americans provides. Multiple messages, but we're really going to focus on about 5 of them throughout the series as we move forward. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans is a very long document that everybody has access to if you Google it on the internet. About 180 pages of reading at your leisure. But what the experts have done is they have taken those messages and that big long document and scaled it down. They scaled it down to this one little picture called My Plate. I want you to take a look at this picture and tell me what you see. The key messages are really here in this one little message, in one little picture. What's one of the first things that I see when I look at this is lots of color. When we eat, we should be eating with a rainbow of colors on our plate. When we eat, we don't eat throughout the entire day. Right? We don't average out our foods. We eat meal by meal, plate by plate. And so the information is presented as to what you should be eating at each meal, at each plate of food in front of you. That makes more sense. They've adjusted this. This used to be that pyramid you may be familiar with, right? It's now called My Plate, and they've revised the picture so that we can actually look at our plates and say, what else do I need to eat here? Or what else should I be including in my meals? One of the big messages is if you cover half of this plate, what do you see? Only fruits and vegetables. Can you think of ways of making half of your plate fruits and vegetables? How many of you watching today can look back at your breakfast or look back at your lunch or maybe your dinner last night and say, yes, half of what I ate was fruits and vegetables on my plate. And did you do that every meal? That is a big goal that you should be setting for yourselves a big shift from your current eating patterns to new eating patterns, healthier eating patterns, where you're eating half of your plate from fruits and vegetables. And when you eat half of your plate from fruits and vegetables, your diet shifts and tends to be lower in saturated and trans fatty acids, lower in sodium, and lower in added sugars. Those are the three things that we are going to focus on today in today's workshop. As we talk about diets that are lower in salt or sodium, lower in added sugar, and lower in saturated fats and trans fatty acids, by the end of today's section, you should be able to list 3 herbs and spices that you can use in your foods to help add some extra flavor without adding extra sodium. You should be able to list 3 ways to limit or cut out some of those added sugar sources in your diet. And you should be able to identify 3 ways to replace healthier fats into your diet in order to limit those saturated fats in your diet. One of the goals that we have is to drink and eat less sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars. So right now, let's take a look at ways to drink and eat less sodium. Sodium. This is a big ticket item in our diets, right? How much sodium should we have in our diets every day? Less than 2,200 milligrams of sodium. And that's for the average adult. If you have heart disease or heart disease runs in your family, then you should be shooting for less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. The average American diet is 3,400 to 4,000 milligrams of sodium. So we are almost double in the average American diet. And when I say average, there's some people who are consuming more than that and some people who are consuming less than that. So how do we get to that goal? And when we take salt, sugar, and fat out of our food, what's left? We want our foods to taste good. We want to be able to enjoy our meals. So let's talk about how to cut that salt, but still have some flavor in our foods. When we look at our nutrition facts label for salt, we can think about how often we eat. We oftentimes have 3 meals and maybe a snack throughout the day. And so if on average we should be consuming less than 2,000 milligrams of sodium each day and we're eating about 4 times a day, mathematically we should be shooting for about 500 milligrams of sodium at each of those meal times. So we can use our labels and say, okay, how much sodium is in my bread, how much sodium is in my peanut butter and in my jelly and then my piece of fruit and whatever it is that you are eating at that meal. You can add it all up and make sure you're below that 500 milligrams per meal. How much sodium is in 1 teaspoon? We all know what a teaspoon measure is, right? You've added it at the stove when you're cooking or in a baking recipe. 1 teaspoon of salt has 2,400 milligrams of sodium in it, more than what we should be eating in our entire day. One of the biggest recommendations I can make is to get rid of that salt shaker. Take it off the table, take it away from the stove when you're cooking, and when those recipes call for a teaspoon of salt, because many of our casseroles, our soups, it's a standard teaspoon. Oh, add a teaspoon of salt. And it doesn't matter what kind of salt. It could be sea salt. It could be the regular iodized salt, kosher salt. All of these salts have about 2,400 milligrams of sodium in them. There's not one salt that's healthier than another. It's just across the board. You want to limit salt, any of the types of salt. So what can we use instead? In our soups, in our lasagna, in our baked goods. Well, I will tell you, for your baked goods, you don't need salt in them. Salt does not provide any kind of cooking chemistry. It's not there for any kind of leavening or to make the product turn out more soft or have a better texture. That's not what salt is there for. Salt is purely a flavoring agent. Salt used to be, when we originally used salt in food way back in the day, it was a preservative, right? Because you added salt and it would draw out the water in our foods. And so when we didn't have refrigeration, a long time ago, we could use salt to help preserve the food. We don't really have those issues now in the modern day times. What salt now is used for is for flavoring. And boy, does it do a really good job. We don't have to think about salt and what food does it taste good on, right? We can put salt on potato or rice. We can put salt on our meats and beans. We get salted nuts and unsalted nuts, right? And on our vegetables, people even salt their fruit, right? I've heard some people do their watermelon or their mango. Salt is universal as far as flavoring. This is why our other herbs and spices tend to not be the go-to for flavoring, because people have to think a little more about how they're going to use their herbs and spices in their foods. They have to, we're not going to use curry powder on everything. Curry is great in soups. Curry is great on any of our side dishes like rice or barley or I make a nice creamy risotto out of brown rice or barley, and I will add coconut milk and curry powder and then a ton of veggies, and you have this curried rice dish or barley or whatever grain it is that you're using at the time. So you can add it in your handouts, and this picture will be shown on the screen. In your handouts, there is a list of herbs and spices and how you can use your different herbs and spices. Oregano is great in anything that you have tomato in. And oregano and parsley and garlic and onion tend to go well together. So you can add these things together to add some flavor to your food when you've gotten rid of that salt shaker. Some people ask me about the herb blends that are out there. Sometimes you have to be careful with some of your herb blends, like a lemon pepper may have salt in them. The way you know whether or not salt is in any of your herb blends is just simply look at the list of ingredients on your herbs and spices that you're purchasing in the grocery store. Another tip about your herbs and spices is that the volatile aromatics that give us the flavor in our herbs and spices tend to dissipate after about a year on your shelf. So if you've got those old metal tins from 25 or 50 years ago still in your pantry, you might want to dump those. Keep the tins. You can go and get really cheap, budget-friendly herbs and spices at any of your bulk stores. There are some herbs and spice bulk stores, a bulk section of some of your grocery stores. Some of the Amish stands often sell bulk spices, and you can get, take your container and say, I'd just like enough spice to fill up this container, and it's a few pennies then compared to a few dollars in the grocery store. When purchasing canned goods in the grocery store, you want to, again, look at the nutrition facts panel and the label and look for the words no salt added on your canned vegetables, on your canned beans. Another option for your beans is to buy the dried beans and then add water and reconstitute them without the salt added. And these are great ways for you to cut the salt in your diet but still add flavor. It's going to be farmers market season soon, and growing your own garden maybe. When you have some herbs and spices, maybe your friend, your neighbor is going to give you a handful of what's growing in abundance in their yard. Chop them up. Use your ice cube tray. Fill it in one of the ice cube containers. Throw some water over top of that and freeze it. And now, every casserole dish or soup that you have in the winter, you will have the wonderful benefit of those fresh flavors that you get with fresh herbs and spices. If you just take one of these ice cubes and plop it right into the soup, and the water will melt away, the herbs and spices will be there as if you were chopping them fresh that same day. Now we know that one of the goals is to drink and eat less sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars. So let's look at the next component of that statement. Let's look at some ways where we can reduce our intake of sugar. We're going to move on to how to cut added sugars. What is added sugar versus natural sugars? Natural sugars are those things that are naturally found in our food. So when we look at the food groups, our fruits have natural sugars in them. Our dairy group has natural sugars in them. You might look at a glass of milk and go, why are there 15 grams of carbohydrates in a glass of milk? That's the natural sugar that's there. Natural sugars are really a great part of our diet. These are not the sugars that we have to be concerned about or worried about when we're talking about overall health and chronic disease. What we're looking for to stay away from are those added sugars. If you measure out 10 teaspoons of sugar onto a plate, into a bowl, and you look at that, you would be amazed that that is what you are eating if you have a 12-ounce soda. And most of the time, it's difficult to get a 12-ounce soda serving these days, right? When you go to a vending machine, they're oftentimes the 20 or 24 ounce. So now we're talking almost double the amount of teaspoons of sugar in one beverage. And we call these sugar-loaded beverages. I'm not just talking about soda. This is iced tea, lemonade, any of those sugar-loaded beverages that are out there have a lot of sugar. By switching simply to water, and you can flavor your water a lot of different ways. Throw in a couple slices of cucumber and a couple sprigs of mint, and now you have mint cucumber water. Just by switching from, if you're drinking one of these a day, to water instead, that would have been equivalent to drinking about 30 pounds of sugar in 1 year. That's a lot. If you cut that, you could essentially lose about 14 pounds of weight without making any other changes to your diet in 1 year. If you make some of the other changes that we're talking about, you can continue to lose weight other ways as well. So how do we cut some of these added sugars from our diet? We eat some things that are really healthy, and we say, oh, I'm doing great, I'm eating oatmeal for breakfast. But what do we do with our oatmeal? Oh, a few scoops of brown sugar, right? Instead, you can have a really healthy breakfast and it'll taste good. Instead of flavoring it with brown sugar, throw in some frozen fruit when you go to cook it, whether you're cooking it on the stovetop or in the microwave. My preference is the microwave. It's fast and less dishes. So you throw that fruit right into the container, and what's going to happen to the fruit as it cooks? Whether it's fresh fruit or frozen fruit, but frozen fruit is available year-round, right? It's going to melt, and all of those natural sugars that are in that fruit are going to infuse into that oatmeal and flavor the oatmeal. And if it's not quite sweet enough for what you're used to or what you like, remember that your taste buds will adjust over time, but you can add some other flavoring options. You can use some cinnamon in there, maybe a dash of vanilla extract as well. And so if you have to still add a touch of brown sugar, it won't be quite as much. And you'll still have this wonderfully healthy meal that you've had, and now you've added some other food groups for balance and variety. Some other ways to cut added sugars from your diet would be to use citrus. I love to use citrus in my cooking. So right here I have a lemon, and there are two parts of a lemon that add flavor to your food. And you can use lemon or orange in your foods. I will take two different ways that I would use citrus in my foods. If I were using a lemon and doing it in one of my favorites is taking brown rice. So I'll cut up an onion and throw it in the water. I'll zest the lemon, and so this is a zester, and you want to hold your fingertips away from the zester because it is quite sharp, and you just rub it along the skin and you will get a nice, oh goodness, there we go, a nice zest off of that lemon. And I will take it all the way around and get as much zest off of it as I possibly can. Now cut this in half and use my juicer to get all the juice out of this lemon, and throw both the zest and the juice in that pot of water with the onion, maybe a little bit of garlic, bring it to a boil, and then throw in my rice. And that onion, garlic, and lemon will infuse into the rice as the rice is cooking. When I pull that rice off of after the 20 minutes and it's all nice and warm and fluffed up, I will take a bunch of fresh spinach, chopped up, throw it in there and let it wilt from the heat. I don't cook it, I just let it wilt against the heat of the rice, and then top it with a little bit of feta cheese and serve that as a side dish. Oh, now you say, what? You just said cut back your salt and cheese is full of salt. I recommend that you look at the nutrition of cheese. There's protein, there's calcium. Of course, you want to go with your lower fat cheeses. And if you're going to add some sort of salt for flavor to your food, I would rather it be with a nutritious food like cheese than just the salt shaker, where you're not adding any additional nutritional benefits to your food. So if you throw on a little bit of feta cheese, portion controlled, right, then you can have a little bit of flavor added that way. So this is another way of adding to your goal of making half of your plate fruits and vegetables. Citrus, you can add orange with your stir fries. So again, I will zest it and juice the orange, and I will set that juice aside with maybe a tablespoon or two of cornstarch in there, whisk it together, and set it aside. I'll saute my vegetables and have a little bit of maybe low low sodium soy sauce. But the water that's coming off of your sauteed vegetables, you can thicken that with the orange juice and zest has the thickener cornstarch in it. Throw it in with your sauteed vegetables and it makes a nice orange glaze over your vegetables that you can then serve over your brown rice for a lovely stir-fry dish. Again, without all the added sugars that you might have in a standard stir-fry recipe. So a couple ways to cut some added sugars in your cooking and your diet. How do you know if your foods that you're buying in the grocery store have added sugars? You can use your nutrition facts panel. There are two parts to your nutrition information on that packaging, right? We have the nutrition facts that tells us total carbohydrates, total of sugars, and then we have your ingredients list. Your ingredients are going to, right now, tell you whether there are added sugars in your foods. When you look at the Nutrition Facts panel, it is in the process of changing right now. The Nutrition Facts panel, you may see on some of your foods a new line there that says included added sugars. This wasn't on our packaging until recently. There have been some regulations and law changes, and with that comes the benefit to us as consumers. We will now know how many of those carbohydrates in our foods have added sugars to them without having to guess or really critique that ingredient list and look for words that end in OSE or have the word sugar in them. So dextrose, maltose, fructose, high fructose corn syrup, honey. That is an added sugar. It's found in nature, and so oftentimes people say, oh, honey, it's natural. But if we're adding it to our food, it is an added sugar. And so if it is in your food list ingredient, it is an added sugar to that food item. The goal is to have less than, I just want to make sure, less than 25 to 36 grams of added sugar. And this is equivalent to about 6 to 9 teaspoons of added sugars in our diet each day. Women, we want to shoot for that lower number. Men, you want to stay below the upper number for sure. This is a great addition to our nutrition facts labels to help give us the right tools to make the right choices in the grocery store when we're choosing foods. We have looked at a lot of ways to drink and eat less sodium and less added sugars. So let's go ahead and look at ways to eat and drink less saturated fat. So let's talk about fats. There are two different types of fats out there, and we want to make a shift to eat the healthier fats, right? We can label them good fats and bad fats, and the bad fats are saturated fats and trans fatty acids. Saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature, and they tend to come from an animal. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule, right? Think about coconut and coconut fat, coconut oil, when we see that in the grocery store. It comes in a jar and it's white and it's solid at room temperature. But coconut is not from an animal. It is a plant-based fat. This is the exception. There are certain fats that do come from a plant that are not unsaturated fats. They are full of saturated fats, and we have to limit those just the same as we limit our saturated fats. Saturated fats and trans fatty acids tend to be the fats that are associated with heart disease and other chronic diseases. It's recommended to limit our saturated fats to less than 10% of our total fat intake for the entire day, or 10% of our total caloric intake for the entire day. So what does that mean? We just want to make choices where we're cutting portions or cutting how often we're eating foods that are full of saturated fats, so animals, products, as well as butters, lard, those kind of things in our cooking, and shift and move towards those healthier fats, the plant-based fats. The plant-based fats are unsaturated fatty acids. They tend to be liquid at room temperature. This is olive oil, canola oil, corn oil, right? They're liquid at room temperature. When we have foods that are plant-based, that are full of fat, an avocado is a great example. This is a very high-fat, plant-based food. However, it's the good fat. It can be heart protective when we include the healthy fats in our diet, and cut back on those not so heart healthy saturated fats. Nuts, beans, avocado. These are plant-based foods that are high in fat that we want to include in our diet. A little tip about buying avocados in the grocery store. This little stem on there, if you're in the grocery store, pluck it off and look in that circle area, and if it is a nice green, then it is still it's not overripe. Sometimes you cut into the avocado and it's starting to look brown. So if you see that it's brown there, the inside of the shell, the avocado meat, will be brown as well. So if it's nice and green, you know that the inside is green as well. When you cut into an avocado, you can cut around the pit and twist to help separate it, and it makes it a lot easier to then shell out the inside of the avocado. If you can't eat the whole avocado in one sitting, storage, right? It tends to go brown pretty quickly in your refrigerator. Keep both halves of your avocado. So you may have this bottom half that still has your avocado meat in it. Keep the seed in there. Don't pull it. The top half, if you've eaten that avocado part, keep the shell. Put it back on and store it in your fridge this way, and it will keep it from browning. Just a little tip. You can use avocado or hummus. Hummus is chickpeas, right? So you can use avocado or hummus instead of mayonnaise on your sandwiches. Now you have healthy fats on your sandwich, and you still have that desired creamy texture that we look for, that mayonnaise generally gives to us on our sandwiches. If you still choose to use mayonnaise, go with the lower fat mayonnaise. Same with any of your dairy products. Yogurts, milks, cottage cheese. Choose the lower fat version. Regular cheese in the grocery store. It can be sometimes difficult to find a low fat or a reduced fat cheese. Now, even though all your dairy products are from an animal, and yes, that fat in those products are saturated fat, we're not saying get rid of all saturated fat, but cut it back. So this is one simple way that by switching from your regular full fat cottage cheese to a low fat cottage cheese, this cuts the amount of saturated fat that you're getting in your diet. And by switching sometimes from certain fat sources that are full of saturated fat to, say, avocado or hummus. Hummus is a great snack food, so you can have these healthy foods, healthy unsaturated fats added into your diet to cut back where you might have had those saturated fats. You can add nuts and seeds to salad, to stir fry, and again, help increase the amount of unsaturated fatty acids in your diet. So think about modifying a recipe. Look at a recipe that may have been handed down from generation to generation. This may have been your grandmother's recipe, a soup recipe, and you can look at it and go, oh, it's delicious. This is why it's been handed down from generation to generation. But we can look at some of the tips that we've talked about today to cut salt, to cut added sugar, to cut fat. You can replace the full fat milk in that soup recipe with 1% milk or a lower fat skim milk. And you can cut the fat, the sugar, and the salt without cutting flavor. Remember, small changes make big differences over time. And you may not like all of the recommendations that I've stated here today. You don't have to go home and do everything that I've talked about today. But pick one thing or two things to start with and start slowly with those changes and make them habits. Once you make them habits, then it's easy for you to add in a new habit down the road and slowly make lifestyle changes. Tune in next time for our next SNAP-Ed workshop, making healthy eating a part of your total lifestyle. We're really going to focus next time on the protein part and your grain section of the My Plate. I hope you enjoyed today's session and can't wait to see you again. I hope that you've enjoyed today's lessons, and I hope that you're able to think of some ways that you can make some small changes to make half of your plate fruits and vegetables, and how to drink and eat less sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of Chautauqua Strong and Healthy. Look for other editions in this series on Access Chautauqua on channel 1301, or Access Chautauqua's Facebook page, and also on YouTube. I'm Doc Hamels, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. We know the healthy choice isn't always the easiest choice, but small changes can make a big difference. Start today by getting involved with SNAP-Ed New York. This program is free for those who qualify or receive SNAP benefits. We want to help you save time, save money, and eat healthy. Learn how SNAP-Ed can make a difference in your life. For more information and to find your local program, visit snapedny.org. This material is funded by USDA's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. SNAP. This institution is an equal opportunity provider.
This has been an equal opportunity workshop.